We are going to begin our series on market structures. We are going to first look at a perfectly competitive market. The other sorts of market structures that we are going to look at will be monopolies, monopolistically competitive markets, and oligopolies. And we will take a look at how these function, how price and output are determined. So we are going to be focused on perfect competition to begin with, and the characteristics in perfect competition are that we have lots of firms, we also have lots of buyers, everybody's producing the exact same thing. It's very easy for firms to enter and exit the market. Typically we think of agricultural products as representing perfectly competitive market structures. So let's get into the details then of what we mean. In a perfectly competitive market, we have lots of buyers and lots of sellers, and everybody is selling the exact same thing. We call this a homogeneous market or homogeneous goods. So there are no barriers to entry. New firms can enter the market if they think that it would be profitable for them to do so, and firms can fairly easily leave the market as well. These are the conditions that we need to have in place in order for perfectly competitive firms to be price takers, which means that they don't have the power to impact the price or to control the price. They're very small. It's not just that there are a lot of buyers and sellers, but that everybody is such a small player, the market is pretty evenly distributed among them. So nobody has power to control the price, and everybody is selling exactly the same thing. It's hard to meet all of these conditions. So we don't really have a market that is perfectly represented by perfect competition, but we have markets that come close. So each individual firm in a perfectly competitive market is too small to affect the price. What this means then is that firms face perfectly elastic demand. So if we think about the wheat market, this is something that approaches being perfectly competitive. It doesn't matter how many bushels of wheat you sell, you are too small to have an impact on the market price. What this means then is that you will have a horizontal demand curve for your individual farm. Now, there are lots of farmers in the market. Collectively, they are facing that market supply and demand setup that we think of. So this interaction of supply and demand is what is going to determine the market price of wheat. That price is the price that the farmer accepts. That farmer has to sell wheat at that price. If he tries to sell more or sell it for a higher price, nobody's going to buy. And it wouldn't be rational for that farmer to undercut everybody else, because he's not going to be able to gain enough in the market to take it over at some point. There would be no incentive for the farmer to accept a lower price than what is the market price. So the goal of a firm, regardless of market structure, is to maximize profit. What do we mean by that? Well, profit is the difference between total revenue and total cost. So that difference, the farmer wants to make that, or the firm wants to make that as big as possible. So the firm is receiving the same amount of money per unit as everybody else is in the market. It's that market price. And so that price is going to be equal to average revenue, which is going to be equal to marginal revenue. What do we mean by this? This means that if you take the total revenue, all the money that comes in from sales of the product, and divide it by the quantity of the product sold, that's average revenue, and it's equal to the price. Every additional unit that the firm sells, that the firm receives the market price for. So those are all equal in perfect competition. Here we have some data for a perfectly competitive firm. We can see in our first column we have number of bushels going from 0 to 10. We have a market price, and again this is determined in the market, so it's given to the firm, and it's $7 a bushel. Total revenue is just going to be the quantity times the price. Average revenue is going to be the total revenue divided by the quantity. Marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in Q. Well, the change in Q is just going to be 1 each time. So again, the additional revenue you get for every additional unit you sell is just the market price. So we have 7s going all the way down the column for marginal revenue, 7s going all the way down the column for average revenue, and these are equal to the market price. Here we add in total cost for this farmer for producing various quantities of the good. So we have our quantity in the first column, total revenue in the second column, total cost in the third column, and then profit is just total revenue minus total cost. And we can see, looking down this column of profit, that the profit is largest at 7 bushels. The profit at that point is $13.50. That is the profit maximizing level of output for this farmer. We can also calculate marginal revenue and marginal cost for the firm. And profit maximization is going to involve finding that point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, or producing as long as marginal revenue is greater than or equal to marginal cost. So marginal revenue, again, this is just the price in perfect competition. Marginal cost, we take a look at that total cost and look at the change in total cost over the change in Q. So that means we're dividing by 1 every time. We're just taking the cost from 1 bushel minus the cost for 0, the cost for 2 bushels minus the cost for 1, calculating that marginal cost. And we can see at 7 bushels, marginal revenue is $7, marginal cost is $6.50. If we were to produce 1 more bushel, our marginal cost would be greater than our marginal revenue, and so we don't want to produce 1 more bushel. We want to get as close to marginal revenue and cost being equal without reaching the point where marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue. So 7 bushels is our profit maximizing output. We can take a look at this graphically. Here we have a graph of total revenue, which is just going to be a ray shooting out from the origin. And we have total cost. This is just a representative total cost curve like what we would have constructed in the previous chapter. And what we want to do is maximize the difference between the total revenue and the total cost curves. And we can see here graphically where that is maximized. We can also look at a graph of marginal revenue and marginal cost. So marginal revenue is constant, it's just equal to the price, so it's a horizontal line at the market price. The firm is going to maximize profit by choosing the level of output where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. We can see here that that is going to end up being at 7 bushels. That's where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect. Granted, we're going to be off a little bit here because of the cost structure that we had, but that is going to be the profit maximizing output. So, for a firm to maximize profit, the profit maximizing level of output is where the difference between total revenue and total cost is the greatest, and it's also where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is true regardless of what the market structure is. In perfect competition, we can add another rule because price is equal to marginal revenue. So what this means is that the profit maximizing level of output is where price is equal to marginal cost. So let's take a look at this using cost curves. We can use a formula. So profit is total revenue minus total cost, and total revenue is just going to be P times Q minus our total cost. We can divide both sides by Q. So what we get then is the profit divided by Q is equal to P times Q divided by Q minus total cost divided by Q. We can cancel the Q's in the first term on the right-hand side, and so then we get price, and the second term, TC over Q, is just average total cost. If we multiply both of those terms by Q, or multiply both sides by Q, what we end up with is that profit is equal to price minus average total cost, the difference between those two, times Q. So the right-hand side is the area of a triangle with the height of price minus average total cost and the length Q. And we're going to show this graphically. So here we go. This is like what I would have demonstrated in my videos. We are going to maximize profit where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So we see where that marginal cost curve intersects the price line, and that is our Q. The difference between price and the average total cost at that level of output, Q, is equal to the profit per unit of output. So the profit is represented by the green rectangle in this slide. Total profit equals profit per unit of output times the amount of output. And that's that green rectangle. So they're pointing out a common mistake that students often make, which is to think that the firm should produce at Q1 where profit per unit is maximized, but this is not going to maximize the overall level of profit because the next few units of output are going to bring in more marginal revenue than their marginal costs. They're going to keep adding profit to the firm. And we can tell this because we know that marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost at that level of output. It's greater than marginal cost until we get to Q, the profit maximizing level of output. We can think about this in a slightly different way. So we know that we should be producing at the level of output where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. We keep referring to this as the profit maximizing level of output, but maybe the firm isn't actually making a profit at that level of output or at any other level of output. So it might not always work. We need to think about this. We might be in a position where we are having to consider making the smallest loss possible. It might be unavoidable sometimes to lose money because we have fixed costs that go along with our production. So it's still the correct rule to use marginal cost equal to marginal revenue because it's going to help us get to the loss minimizing level of output. Here we have an example of a firm breaking even. So in this case, we have our profit maximizing level of output where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, or the price, and it turns out that that price is the same as our average total cost at that level of output. So the best this firm can hope to do is break even. There's no profit, there's no loss. This is still going to be the optimal level of production because the firm is going to be able to cover their fixed costs. Here is a slightly worse situation because it turns out at the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, our average total cost at that level of output is actually greater than the price. So we can see there that pink rectangle indicates a loss. This is going to be the loss minimizing level of output for this firm. All right, so how do we know right off the bat if a firm is making a profit or making a loss or breaking even? If the price is greater than the average total cost at that profit maximizing level of output, they're making a profit. If price is equal to average total cost at that profit maximizing level of output, they're breaking even. If price is less than average total cost at that profit maximizing level of output, they are making a loss. So what does a firm decide to do then? So it has a decision about whether to produce at that profit maximizing level of output despite the fact that they're actually losing money, or they also have the option of shutting down in the short run. This is not going to be the same as going out of business. All right, so let's say that a firm is making a loss. The price is lower than it needs it to be in order to make money, but it doesn't control the price because it's a perfectly competitive firm, so it can't raise the price, so it can either continue to produce or shut down temporarily. If they shut down in the short run, they still have to pay their fixed costs, so they need to decide whether they should just incur the fixed costs or whether they should produce and incur some variable costs but obtain some revenue that might eat into their fixed costs a bit. So the firm's fixed costs they're going to need to be treated as sunk costs. They've already been paid. They can't be recovered. The firm has to pay them whether it produces anything or not. These costs shouldn't be considered in the decision making. The firm is going to make its decision based on variable costs. So it should produce nothing only if total revenue is less than variable cost. We can divide both sides of this inequality by Q, and we obtain price less than average variable cost. If the price is less than the average variable cost, the firm should make the decision to shut down temporarily. As long as the price is greater than the average variable cost, then the firm should produce at the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, because this is going to minimize losses. So that marginal cost curve gives us a relationship between price and quantity supplied of a firm, past that point where price is equal to average variable cost, and that means that basically what it is the firm's supply curve. The firm is going to produce at the level of output at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Once you have passed the minimal acceptable price, where price is equal to the minimum of the average variable cost. So price equals marginal revenue. So the firm is going to produce where price is equal to marginal cost. It is going to supply output according to that marginal cost curve, which means it's the supply curve for an individual firm. Except to the left of that minimum point of average variable cost. Once you move left of there, the firm is going to shut down temporarily. It won't produce anything. So we can look at a supply curve for an individual farmer and for the market as a whole. Individual wheat farmers take the prices given and choose their output according to the price. When we put all of those individual supply curves together, we get the market supply curve for wheat. What happens in the long run with these firms? So let's say, we'll use an example here. We have a small carrot farm. They're borrowing money from the bank. They're using some savings. They have explicit costs that are pretty straightforward here and listed out: water, wages, fertilizer, electricity, payment on the bank loan. And then there are also included the implicit costs, the opportunity cost of using the savings, the salary that was given up. So those are added into the total cost. Every year, this farmer, Sasha, produces 10,000 boxes and sells them for $15 each, which means that her total revenue is 15 times 10,000, or 150,000. So she makes an economic profit of $25,000 a year. Here we have a slightly different example. In this case, the total cost for Sasha ends up being $110,000. Same price, same total revenue, $150,000. In this case, Sasha's farm makes an economic profit of $40,000 per year. These profits in a perfectly competitive market structure, though, are not going to last. Why? Well, remember, we have the condition that it's easy to enter and exit the market. So if people know that Sasha is making profits, they're going to enter the market because they're going to be attracted by that. So maybe some farmers are going to switch from other types of produce to producing carrots, or maybe some people are going to open up entirely new farms. However, what is going to happen is that the number of farms in this market will increase. This is going to cause an increase in supply. That supply curve is going to shift to the right, and this is going to result in a lower price. We can see that here. Farmers entering the market, the supply curve shifts to the right. The price decreases. So on the right-hand side are the curves for our farmer, and we have the marginal cost and average total cost curve. So the price is determined by the market on the left. The economic profit when the price is 15 is indicated by the green rectangle, but that green rectangle is going to shrink. So now in the market, the price has dropped down to $10. That means that marginal revenue or demand curve for the individual farmer is going to drop down to that $10 mark. And now there's no incentive for further firms to enter the market, because now actually this farmer is losing money. No economic profit. So what happens with economic losses? So if the price is $10 a box and carrot farmers are breaking even, let's say, maybe demand for carrots falls and the price falls to $7 a box. Now this farmer can't make a profit, and she or he is going to make the smallest loss possible by producing 5,000 carrots. So it's going to affect the profit maximizing output of the individual farmer. Because farmers are now losing money, farmers are going to leave the market. So this is going to result in a shift to the left of the supply curve. This is going to cause the equilibrium price to go back up, and firms are going to keep leaving the market, until the price returns to the break-even price of $10 a box. All right, a long-run competitive equilibrium is what will be achieved in a perfectly competitive market. If firms or farmers are making an economic profit, other firms are going to enter the market, and this is going to drive the price down to the break-even level, where price is equal to average total cost. If firms are making an economic loss, firms are going to exit the market, and this is going to drive the price up to the break-even level, where the price is equal to average total cost. That long-run average cost curve shows the lowest cost at which a firm is able to produce a given quantity of output in the long run. And the price is going to be driven down to the minimum point on the typical firm's long-run average cost curve. This means that in a perfectly competitive market, the equilibrium is that in which the entry and exit of firms has resulted in the typical firm breaking even, no economic profit. In the long run, the market is going to supply any demand from consumers at a price equal to the minimum point on the typical firm's average cost curve. So, in the long run, in a perfectly competitive market, the price is equal to the minimum of average total cost. The long run supply curve is horizontal at that price. In a perfectly competitive market, that long run price is completely determined by those market forces. The number of suppliers are going to adjust to meet the demand at the lowest possible price. So this is an indication of the supply curve in the long run. If there's an increase in demand, this temporarily increases the price and allows firms to earn economic profits. That's going to attract new firms into the industry, which is going to shift the supply curve to the right, bringing the price back down and eliminating economic profits. We could see the same as a result of a decrease in demand, that we end up back on that long-run supply curve. Price is always going to return to the break-even level. Here's just a quick little story on the iPhone apps. We can talk about this a little bit, although I'm not going to get into this in terms of a testing situation with increasing cost and diminishing cost industries. But now let's talk about perfect competition and efficiency. So remember, when we were talking about efficiency, we're talking about two things going on here. Productive efficiency, which is when a good or service is being produced at the lowest possible cost, and allocative efficiency, when production is representing consumer preferences. In the long run, perfectly competitive markets are productively efficient. So we get at that minimum of the average total cost. In the short run, in the long run, we can also demonstrate that they are allocatively efficient. So the price of the good represents the marginal benefit consumers receive from consuming the last unit of the good sold. Firms produce up to the point where the price of that good equals the marginal cost of producing the good. And so they are producing up to the point where the last unit provides a marginal benefit to the consumers that is equal to the marginal cost of producing it. So at that equilibrium point where supply intersects with demand in our supply and demand model. So in a perfectly competitive market, in the long run, we achieve both productive and allocative efficiency. Let's end our chapter with the common misconceptions to avoid. So an individual firm in perfect competition faces a horizontal demand curve at the market price, but the market demand curve is still going to be downward sloping. We talked about several different supply curves in this chapter: an individual firm supply curve, the market short-run supply curve, the market long-run supply curve. Make certain that you understand the difference among the three of these. Remember, when we talk about a firm making zero economic profit, it doesn't mean they're not making a profit. They're still making an accounting profit, but it is an adequate level of profit to cover opportunity costs. So a firm is still making a profit, but not in an economic sense. Firms are going to shut down in the short run when price is less than average variable cost, but this is different from exiting the market in the long run. in the long run, firms exit when the price is less than the average total cost.